generous time today. We appreciate it. Now, I'm not talking potatoes or apples or turkeys, but you know I'm going to talk to you about Tennessee whiskey. And we've got some great ones when you look at Jack Daniels and Georgia Dickel and the Nelson Brothers and Uncle Nearest. And I thank you for the work you have done on those issues and wanted to see if you could give me an update of where we are in the process. We're concerned about India's 150% tariff. We're concerned about the barriers this present. You're just talking about how manufacturing, production, and trade go hand in hand. So if you would give us a little bit of an update there.
So with respect to India and the challenges that we face there, I'll just refer to the commitments that I've made to the other members on their issues. I make that commitment to you as well, Senator Blackburn, to work hand in glove with you on tapping that potential with India and making progress with respect to barriers, in this case on Tennessee whiskey. The other note I would make is that Tennessee whiskey and our producers got very much caught in the crossfire of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs a couple years ago. I just want to provide a status update that with respect to the European Union and our lowering of tariffs as part of the Boeing Airbus dispute, that we gave ourselves 5 years to create a framework where we can figure out how to work with each other better to take on challenges that we share. And I'd like you to know that we are doing very good work as a part of that framework. As well, in the steel and aluminum context with the European Union, they took down their retaliatory tariffs. We converted them from being subject to a tariff to duty-free trade with some guardrails for 2 years, and we are facing down a deadline at the end of this year to conclude our global steel and aluminum arrangement, where we can avoid having to get back into that situation.
Let me ask you about that, because on the 301s, you think that your timetable is by the end of this year, is that?
Sorry, the steel and aluminum with Europe is 232. 301s are with respect to China, and that's a separate, that's a separate issue.
Okay, so then you don't have an update. You've opened that portal.
I can give you an update on the 301s as well.
Perfect.
So we have started a process. We opened that portal. We invited, at the request of U.S. economic stakeholders, to review the 301 actions from a couple years ago, and those are the tariffs. The portal closed a couple weeks ago, and so we are in receipt of thousands of responses that we are have taken a very responsible, deliberate approach. We will be reviewing those, and we will be undertaking a process for assessing the 301 tariffs over the course of the next weeks and months.
Okay, let me ask you, we've talked a little bit internally in our office about protecting IP. And when we look at China, when we look at what happened around COVID vaccines and the WTO, along with the support of the Biden administration, reached a 5-year waiver on COVID vaccines last, I think it was June. And then the administration supported a limited waiver in 21, but then they supported the final WTO decision. So as a result of that, we fear that this is going to be something that hampers and slows innovation in U.S. competitiveness. So talk a little bit about what is happening with this administration and protecting these IP, protecting American IP in these trade agreements.
Certainly. So in 2021, what we did was lean into the negotiations at the WTO to make sure the WTO would address this issue of whether or not intellectual property modifications needed to be made during COVID. The result was in 2022, a negotiation concluded with 164 members of the WTO to make modifications to the IP rules, similar to what we'd done in the early 2000s around HIV treatments and therapeutics. There is now an open question at the WTO around whether or not modifications be made also to COVID therapeutics and diagnostics, and that is a question that we have put to the International Trade Commission here, an independent agency, to run a robust process of consulting with stakeholders and inviting commentary. That is something where the ITC will be concluding its report later this year. In terms of intellectual property, we are very proud of being an extremely innovative economy that is really quite often the envy of the rest of the world. And that is also part of the reason why we are leaning into, to bring it back to the beginning of our conversation, revitalizing manufacturing in America as well, because manufacturing is a very intimately connected part of that innovation cycle. So
the time of the gentlewoman has expired, and we're going to have to move on because you've got colleagues who still haven't had questions. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador, it's great to see